What is the brain? The brain is a complex organ that controls thought, memory, emotion, touch, motor skills, vision, breathing, temperature, hunger, and every process that regulates our body. Together, the brain and spinal cord that extends from it make up the central nervous system or CNS. Main parts of the brain include cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. You could see the picture: cerebrum, brainstem, and cerebellum. Next is about cerebellum. The cerebellum, also called as little brain, is a fist-sized portion of the brain located at the back of the head, below the temporal and occipital lobes, and above the brainstem. Like the cerebral cortex, it has two hemispheres. The outer portion contains neurons, and the inner area communicates with the cerebral cortex. Its function is to coordinate voluntary muscle movements and to maintain posture, balance, and equilibrium. New studies are exploring the cerebellum's role in thought, emotions, and social behavior, as well as its possible involvement in addiction, autism, and schizophrenia. An anatomical location: the cerebellum is located at the back of the brain, immediately inferior to the occipital and temporal lobes, and within the posterior radial fossa. The cerebellum is located at the back of the brain, immediately inferior to the occipital and temporal lobes, and within the posterior radial fossa. It is separated from these lobes by the tentorium cerebelli. Tentorium cerebelli, a tough layer of dura mater. Tentorium cerebelli, a tough layer of dura mater. It lies at the same level and posterior to the pons, from which it is separated from the fourth ventricle. And structure and divisions: the cerebellum consists of two hemispheres which are connected by the vermis, a narrow midline area. Like other structures in the central nervous system, the cerebellum consists of grey matter and white matter. So, grey matter located on the surface of the cerebellum, it is tightly folded, forming the cerebellar cortex. White matter located underneath the cerebellar cortex. Embedded in the white matter are the four cerebellar nuclei: the dentate, emboliform, globose, and fastigial nuclei. There are three ways that the cerebellum can be subdivided: anatomical lobes, zones, and functional divisions. So, anatomical lobes: primary fissure is there, posterior lateral fissure is also there, anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and flocculo. So, anatomical lobes. Next one, anatomical lobes. There are three anatomical lobes that can be distinguished in the cerebellum: the anterior lobe, the posterior lobe, and the flocculonodular lobe. These lobes are divided by two fissures: the primary fissure and posterior lateral fissure. Then zones. There are three cerebellar zones. In the midline of cerebellum is the vermis. Either side of the vermis is the intermediate zone. Lateral to the intermediate zone are the lateral hemisphere. There is no difference in gross structure between the lateral hemisphere and intermediate zones. So, primary fissure is there. When we try to draw this picture, try to draw this like this. Then posterior lateral fissure on the both inside. Posterior lateral fissure, then primary fissure, vermis region, intermediate zone, along with the lateral hemisphere. Just look at this portion. Separation zone ആയിട്ട് തിരിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്, സോൺസ് ആയിട്ട് മാറ്റിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. അതെങ്ങനെയാണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ ആൻറ്റീരിയർ ലോബ് കാണാൻ സാധിക്കും, posterior lobe കാണാൻ സാധിക്കും, flocculonodular lobe. So there will be three portions, like anterior lobe is there, posterior lobe is there, and flocculonodular lobe is there. Then vasculature, we are going to learn about vasculature. The cerebellum receives its blood supply from three paired superior cerebellar artery or SCA, anterior inferior cerebellar artery, posterior inferior cerebellar artery. The SCA and AICA are branches of the basilar artery which wraps around the anterior aspect of the pons before reaching the cerebellum. The PICA is a branch of the vertebral artery. Venous drainage of the cerebellum is by the superior and inferior cerebellar veins. They drain into the superior petrosal, transverse, and straight dural venous sinus. Functions: the cerebellum can also be divided by function. There are three functional areas of the cerebellum: the cerebrocerebellum, the spinocerebellum and the vestibulocerebellum. Cerebrospinal കോഡുമായിട്ട് റിലേറ്റ് ചെയ്ത ഭാഗം cerebrocerebellum, spinocerebellum and vestibulocerebellum. Then we are going to explain all these portions. Cerebrocerebellum, the largest division formed by the lateral hemisphere. It is involved in planning movements and motor learning. It receives input from the cerebral cortex and pontine nuclei and sends outputs to the thalamus and rear red nucleus. This area also regulates coordination of muscle activation and is important in visually guided movements. Then spinocerebellum, comprised of the vermis and intermediate zone of the cerebellar hemisphere. It is involved in regulating body movements by allowing for error correction. It also receives proprioceptive information. Which one is spinocerebellum? Cerebrocerebellum, spinocerebellum, then vestibulocerebellum. The functional equivalent to the flocculonodular lobe, which one? Vestibulocerebellum. It is involved in controlling balance and ocular reflexes, mainly fixation on a target. It receives input from the vestibular system and sends output back to the vestibular nuclei. And maintaining balance, the cerebellum has special sensors that detect shifts in balance and movement. It sends signals for the body to adjust and move. Maintaining balance and coordinating movement. Most body movements require coordination of multiple muscle groups. The cerebellum times muscle action so the body can move smoothly. Then vision, the cerebellum coordinates eye movements. Motor learning, the cerebellum helps the body to learn movements that require practice and fine tuning. For example, the cerebellum plays a role in learning to ride a bicycle or play a musical instrument. Then other functions, researchers believe the cerebellum has some role in thinking, including processing language and mood. However, findings on these functions are yet to receive full exploration. So, maintaining balance is the primary function. Then, coordinating movement, vision, vision in the sense coordination of eye movements, and motor learning and other functions. Other functions in the sense thinking, including processing of language and mood. However, finding of these functions are yet to receive full exploration. So this portion will be open for research. Next, we are going to learn about brainstem, its structure, midbrain, pons, medulla, then brainstem functions like motor functions, conduct functions, integrative functions, midbrain functions, pons functions, and medulla functions. So let's dive into the topic. Brainstem. The brainstem lies at the base of the brain and at the top of the spinal cord. The brainstem is the structure that connects the cerebrum of a brain to the spinal cord and cerebellum. In one sense, it is an extension of the spinal cord upward into the cranial cavity because it contains motor and sensory nuclei that perform motor and sensory functions for the face and head regions. Brainstem serves as a way station for command signals from still higher neural centers that command the brainstem to initiate or modify specific control functions throughout the body. And it is composed of three sections in descending order: the midbrain, mesencephalon, pons, and the medulla. It is responsible for many vital functions of life, such as breathing, consciousness, blood pressure, heart rate, and sleep. It contains many critical collections of white and gray matter. The gray matter within the brainstem consists of nerve cell bodies and form many important brainstem nuclei. Then 10 of the 12 cranial nerves arise from their cranial nerve nuclei in the brainstem. Here we could see a picture which depicts brainstem structure, various regions of midbrain, pons, medulla, basilar artery, then vertebral arteries, the location of brainstem, how they are located. Then, although it is the most evolutionary ancient part of our brain, the brainstem is still very complex and important. The brainstem may not provide us with the higher intelligence we normally associate with being human, but it does carry all of the information to and from those areas we do associate with higher intelligence. So this portion is very important. You couldn't neglect this portion while dealing with brain, while learning about brain. It ensures the vital functions necessary to support those areas continue uninterrupted. So Pons region, spinal cord, cerebellum, and medulla. Here we could see another picture. Then structure, we are going to learn about structure. The brainstem is generally composed of three components from above downward: midbrain or mesencephalon, pons part of the metencephalon, medulla or medulla oblongata, myelencephalon. Mesencephalon, metencephalon, myelencephalon. Midbrain, pons, and medulla. This picture depicts a midbrain portion. So the midbrain is a part of the central nervous system located below the cerebral cortex and at the topmost part of the brainstem. The small but important structure plays a critical role in processing visual and auditory signals. Then, when viewed in cross section, the midbrain can be divided into two portions like tectum and cerebral peduncles. And we just enlarge this picture. You could see some portions: tectum, cerebral aqueduct, superior colliculus, PAG, CN3, cerebral nerve 3. Then spinothalamic and trigeminothalamic tracts, red nuclei, crus cerebri, then ventral tegmental area, then root fibers of central nervous system 3, frontopontine fibers, corticolobular fibers, then corticospinal fibers, occipito parieto temporopontine fibers. Temporopontine fibers, then cerebral peduncle, pars compacta, substantia nigra, medial lemniscus, tegmentum or reticular formation, like this. Then tectum and cerebral peduncles are important. So tectum, we are going to explain this one. So tectum, sitting posteriorly, the tectum is composed of the tectal plate and superior and inferior colliculi. The tectum is unique to the midbrain and does not have a counterpart in the set of the rest of the brainstem. Nerve cells within the superior colliculi process vision signals from the retina of the eye before channeling from onto the occipital lobe located at the back of the head. So sitting posteriorly, the tectum composed of the tectal plate and superior and inferior colliculi. The tectum is unique to the midbrain and does not have a counterpart in the rest of the brainstem. Nerve cells within the superior colliculi process vision signals from the retina of the eye before channeling them onto the occipital lobe located at the back of the head. The inferior colliculi is responsible for processing auditory signals before they are channeled through the thalamus and eventually to the primary auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. Then cerebral peduncles are there. The cerebral peduncles are the two stalks that attach the cerebrum to the brainstem. They are structures at the front of the midbrain. They are large, seen on anterior in position, and it is composed of right and left peduncles in which each divide into three parts: tegmentum, substantia nigra, and crus cerebri. So radial nerve 3 or oculomotor nerve appears ventrally between the two cerebral peduncles in the interpeduncular fossa. Radial nerve 4, trochlear nerve, wraps around the lowest part of the cerebral peduncle. Substantia nigra is a crescent-shaped mass of nerve cells in the midbrain with a dynamic role. Although it is the smallest portion of the midbrain, it is involved in the regulation of gathering auditory and visual sensory information, motor control, reward-based learning process, and circadian rhythm. Substantia nigra. Then pons region. Pons is a part of brainstem which links brain to spinal cord. This makes pons a vital section of your nervous system, providing a route for signals to travel to and from brain. Several neurotransmitters in your pons facilitate brain function, particularly sleep. It also helps important connections with the cerebellum via fiber bundles known as the cerebellar peduncles. So we enlarge this picture. Try to learn about the structure. Basilar groove is there. Trigeminal nerve, abducens nerve, facial nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve. Then facial nerve and the vestibulocochlear nerve is there. Nerves that carry information about sensations of touch, pain and temperature from the face and head. Synapse and a nucleus in the pons. Motor commands dealing with eye movement, chewing and facial expressions also originate in the pons. Cranial nerve nuclei in the pons are involved in several other functions including swallowing, tear production, hearing and maintaining balance and equilibrium. So medulla, the medulla oblongata is a tail-like structure at the base of the brain that connects the brain to the spinal cord. It carries signals from the brain to the rest of the body for essential life functions like breathing, circulation, swallowing and digestion. While every part of the brain is important in its own way, the work of the medulla oblongata is essential for sustaining life. The medulla oblongata is divided into two parts, ventral medulla and dorsal medulla. The ventral medulla contains a part of triangular structure called pyramids, which, within which lie the pyramidal tracts. The pyramidal tracts are made up of corticospinal tract and the corticobulbar tract. In the descent through the lower portion of the medulla, immediately above the junction with the spinal cord, the vast majority, 80 to 90% of corticospinal tract screws, forming the point known as the decussation of the pyramids. The ventral medulla also houses another set of paired structures, the olivary bodies, which are located laterally on the pyramids. They contain the olivary nuclei. Consists of superior and inferior olivary nucleus. When we try to enlarge this portion, we could see parts like pons region, pyramid, olivary bodies, anterior fissure, decussation, then anterior lateral sulcus and posterior lateral sulcus. Next is about the upper portion of the dorsal medulla forms the lower region of the fourth ventricle, a fluid-filled cavity formed by the expansion of the cerebral canal of the spinal cord upon entering the brain. The dorsal medulla also is the site of origin for the last several cranial nerves, most of which exit the medulla ventrally. Contains a nucleus called the nucleus of the solitary tract and is crucial for our survival. Receives information about blood flow along with information about levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood from the heart and major blood vessels. Essential to our survival because it ensures vital systems, cardiovascular and respiratory systems are working properly. They're responsible for several reflexive actions including vomiting, swallowing, coughing and sneezing. Several cranial nerves also exist the brainstem at the level of medulla. Posterior median sulcus, nucleus granulus, then pyramid portion, etc. can be seen. Then brainstem functions. Though it is a small, brainstem is an extremely important part of the brain. A conduct structure, base station, provides the origin of the cranial nerves, central nervous system. Conjugate eye movement, motor coordination of the eyes that allows for bilateral fixation on any object. Many integrative functions. Motor functions, control of respiration, control of cardiovascular system, partial control of gastrointestinal function, control of many stereotyped movements of the body, control of equilibrium, control of eye movements. Brainstem serves as a way station for command signals from higher neural centers. Neural centers. The autonomic nerve system is activated mainly by centers located on the spinal cord, brainstem and hypothalamus. Cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, autonomic reflexes. Functions of brainstem nuclei in controlling subconscious stereotyped movements. Anencephaly. Then braidencephaly. Then motor branch of the fifth cranial nerve, and the chewing process is controlled by nuclei in the brainstem, and also swallowing, salivary secretion, then vomiting. Chemoreceptor trigger zone ആയിട്ട് ആക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നു. Then the actual mechanics of feeding are controlled by centers in the brainstem, and vasomotor center for CV control, baroreceptors and medulla. Then brainstem, neurohormonal systems in the human brain for activating 4 neurohormonal systems. Then many of the behavioral functions elicited from the hypothalamus and other limbic structures are also mediated through the reticular nuclei in the brainstem and their associated nuclei. Although the micturition reflex is an autonomic spinal cord reflex, it can also be inhibited or facilitated by centers in the cerebral cortex or brainstem in pons. Then accommodation is controlled by parasympathetic nerves by third cranial nerve. And neural pathways for control of eye movements also shows brainstem nuclei for the third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerves by medial longitudinal fasciculus. An auditory nerves pathway, superior olivary nucleus of tractus solitarius, traced pathway, superior and inferior salivary nuclei. And bulbo-reticular facilitatory area of brainstem for gamma efferent system, stabilis joints, control of cerebral activity by continuous excitatory signals from the brain. Stem reticular excitatory area of the brainstem, bulboreticular facilitatory area. This is the same brainstem reticular area that transmits facilitatory signals downward to the spinal cord to maintain tone in the anti-gravity muscles and to control levels of activity of the spinal cord reflexes. And conduct functions. All information related from the body to the cerebrum and cerebellum or vice versa must transpose the brainstem. The ascending sensory pathways coming from the body to the brain include the spinothalamic tract for pain and temperature sensation, the dorsal column, fasciculus gracilis, and cuneatus for touch, proprioceptive and pressure sensation. Then descending tracts. The corticospinal tract runs through the crus cerebri, the basal part of the pons and the medullary pyramids. 70 to 90% of the fibers cross the pyramidal decussation to form the lateral corticospinal tract destined to synapse on lower motor neurons in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Upper motor neurons that originate in the brainstem vestibular red and reticular nuclei, which also descend and synapse in the spinal cord. Here you could see a picture which depicts all this midbrain portion, pons and medulla. Cranial nerves, midbrain 2, pons 4, medulla oblongata 4. Next is about integrative functions. It controls consciousness and sleep cycle, alertness and arousal through reticular formation. It has got center for cardiovascular, respiratory and autonomic nervous system. It has centers for cough, gag, swallowing and vomiting. Then sense of body balance, vestibular functions. Substantia nigra, which is a part of the basal ganglia, is present in midbrain and is involved in control of movements. Midbrain also contains red nucleus which regulate the motor activity through cerebrum. Then inferior and superior colliculi are situated on the dorsal surface of the midbrain and is involved in auditory, visual processing and required for head movements. Pain sensitivity control. Periaqueducal gray matter of mesencephalin is an area which is rich in endogenous opioid and important in modulation of painful stimuli. Then functions of midbrain, nerve pathway to cerebral hemispheres, auditory and visual reflex centers. Then cranial nerves, cranial nerve 3 and cranial nerve of trochlear nerve and oculomotor, motor nerve, oculomotor and trochlear nerves. Oculomotor nerve is a motor nerve related to eye movement. Then trochlear motor nerve is a superior oblique muscle of eye which rotates the eye down and out. Then functions of pons. acts as a respiratory center. Cranial nerves, trigeminal, skin of face, tongue, teeth, muscle of mastication, then abducens, motor, lateral rectus muscle of eye which rotates eye outward, facial, motor and sensory muscles of expression, then acoustic, sensory and hearing type of cranial nerves. Then functions of medulla, closing of motor tracts, cardiac center, respiratory center, vasomotor center, nerves having muscle control of the blood vessel walls, centers for cough, gag, swallow and vomit, cranial nerves, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory and hypoglossal. Glossopharyngeal in the sense muscle and mucous membranes of pharynx, the constricted openings from the mouth and oral pharynx and the posterior third of tongue. Then vagus, pharynx, larynx, heart, lungs, stomach. Accessory, rotation of the head and shoulder. Hypoglossal, motor, intrinsic muscles of the tongue. Next topic is about cortical white matter, commissures, association fibers, projection fibers, corpus callosum and fornix, basal nuclei, organization and function. We are going to learn about cortical white matter, association fiber, projection fiber, brain commissure, corpus callosum, fornix, basal nuclei, organization and function, and a quick recap of all these points. So let's have an introduction about this topic. Brain, a part of the central nervous system, is located in the skull. A part of the central nervous system is located in the skull. It controls mental and physical actions of the organism. The brain, with the spinal cord and network of nerves, controls information flow throughout the body, voluntary actions. The human nerve system. So, the human nerve system, with its billions of nerve cells, is often contributed as the most complex system of the known universe in the known universe. It starts as a tube of cells, and the embryo rapidly develops three distinct parts called the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. As the forebrain develops, it folds into wrinkles called convolutions. This allows a great surface area to be packed into the limited space of the skull. Human brains have noticeably more convolutions than brains of other species. The cerebrum is a large topmost part of the brain. The cerebral cortex is the outer layer of cerebrum where most of the cell bodies are packed. This layer is visible as a dark layer of grey matter when a preserved brain is sliced. Deep holes in the cerebral cortex called fissures are found in the same location on each brain. They can be used to define major areas in the cerebral cortex called lobes. The temporal lobe is at the side of the brain. So deep folds in the cerebral cortex called fissures are found in the same location on each brain. They can be used to define major areas on the cerebral cortex called lobes. The temporal lobe is at the side of the brain below the lateral fissure. The parietal lobe is above the lateral fissure. The frontal lobe is further forward in the brain. It is the most developed in human than other animals. It contains the prefrontal areas furthest in front, which are involved in complex mental processes such as planning and creativity. The two hemispheres of the brain are somewhat specialized for different activities with language depending upon areas on the left, spatial processing upon areas on the right, emotional processing is also lateralized. However, expert neuroscientists feel that the idea of right brain thinking and left brain thinking has been overdone, and most complex mental activity involve a mix of areas in the two sides. Cortical white matter. Cortical white matter refers to the layer of white matter that lies beneath the cerebral cortex in the brain. White matter is made up of myelinated nerve fibers which are responsible for transmitting signals between different regions of the brain. The cerebral cortex, on the other hand, is the outermost layer of the brain and is responsible for processing sensory information, initiating motor movements, and higher cognitive functions such as perception, thought, and memory. 60% of the brain is cortical white matter. The white matter of the brain can be divided into two main categories: subcortical white matter, which is located deep within the brain, and cortical white matter, which is located immediately beneath the cerebral cortex. Once again, when we try to learn about this, we could see cortical white matter refers to the layer of white matter that lies beneath the cerebral cortex in the brain. White matter is made up of myelinated nerve fibers which are responsible for transmitting signals between different regions of the brain. The cerebral cortex, on the other hand, is the outermost layer of the brain and is responsible for processing sensory information, initiating motor movements, and higher cognitive functions such as perception, thought, and memory. The white matter of the brain can be divided into two main categories: subcortical white matter, which is located deep within the brain, and cortical white matter, which is located immediately beneath the cerebral cortex. Cortical white matter is particularly important for the integration of information between different regions of the cerebral cortex and for the efficient communication between different parts of the brain. Damaged cortical white matter can result in a range of neurological disorders, including cognitive impairments, dementia, and motor dysfunction. Advanced imaging techniques such as diffusion sensor imaging (DTI) have been used to study the microstructure of cortical white matter, which has led to a better understanding of its role in brain function and disease. Classification. So according to their connectivity, white matter tracked class into three groups such as projection fiber, association fiber, and commissural fiber. Commissural fiber. Commissural fiber, white matter, gray matter. Association fiber. Association fibers are a type of nerve fibers in the brain that connect different areas within the same hemisphere. They are responsible for transmitting information between different regions of the brain, allowing for the integration and processing of sensory and motor information, as well as higher cognitive functions such as memory, language, and attention. There are two types of association fibers in the brain: short range and long range. Short range association fibers connect adjacent gyri within the same lobe of the brain, while long range association fibers connect different lobes of the brain. Once again, association fibers are the type of nerve fibers in the brain that connect different areas within the same hemisphere. They are responsible for transmitting information between different regions of the brain, allowing for the integration and processing of sensory and motor information, as well as higher cognitive functions such as language, memory, and attention. There are two types of association fibers in the brain: short range and long range. Short range association fibers connect adjacent gyri within the same lobe of the brain, while long range association fibers connect different lobes of the brain. The long range association fiber can be further divided into different subtypes: the arcuate fasciculus, superior longitudinal fasciculus, inferior longitudinal fasciculus, uncinate fasciculus, and cingulum. The arcuate fasciculus connects the frontal and temporal lobes and is involved in language processing, while the superior longitudinal fasciculus connects the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes and is involved in spatial awareness, attention, and executive functions. So the association fibers, along with the commissural and projection fibers, make up the white matter of the brain, which is responsible for transmitting signals between different parts of the brain. The proper functioning of association fiber is essential for normal brain function, and damage or a disruption of these fibers can result in various neurological disorders such as dementia, aphasia, and apraxia. Some portions are shown: association fibers, commissural region, then projection parts. Superior longitudinal fasciculus connects the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. Then uncinate fasciculus connects frontal to temporal lobe, contributing to the regulation of behavior. Then arcuate fasciculus connect gyri in frontal to temporal lobes, important for language function. Then cingulum connects frontal and parietal lobes to the parahippocampal gyrus and adjacent temporal gyri. Then inferior longitudinal fasciculus connects occipital to temporal pole and contributes to visual recognition. Then projection fibers. Fibers running vertically through the hemisphere consist of cortical afferent fibers conveying impulses to the cerebral cortex, mainly thalamocortical fibers, cortical afferent fibers carrying impulses away from the cortex to the lower centers. Cortical afferent fibers carrying impulses away from the cortex to the lower centers. Corticostriate, corticobulbar, corticopontine, corticospinal, and descending autonomic fibers. Cingulum connects frontal and parietal lobes to the parahippocampal gyrus and adjacent temporal gyri. Inferior longitudinal fasciculus connects occipital to temporal pole and contribute to visual recognition. And deeper to the cortex, these fibers are arranged rapidly as radially as corona radiata. Then the fibers converge to form a sheath called the internal capsule that passes between the thalamus and the basal ganglia. Continue in the crus of the midbrain, basilar part of pons, pyramid of medulla oblongata. Continue in the spinal cord as the corticospinal tracts. Then projection fiber. Projection fibers are a type of nerve fiber in the brain that originate from neurons in the cerebral cortex and travel to other areas of the brain or spinal cord. They are responsible for transmitting signals between the cerebral cortex and other points of nervous system, including the brainstem, thalamus, and spinal cord. In this corticospinal, corticolobular, corticopontine, and geniculocalcarine tracts are identified on DTA. Projection fibers are classified into two groups, the ascending fibers and descending fibers. Ascending fibers transmit signals from lower parts of the nervous system, such as the spinal cord or higher brain regions. Then descending fibers, on the other hand, transmit signals from higher brain regions to lower parts of the nervous system, such as the spinal cord. The most well-known projection fiber are the corticospinal tract, which originate in the motor cortex and travel through the brainstem and spinal cord to control voluntary movements of the body. Other examples of projection fibers include thalamocortical fibers, which connect the thalamus to the cerebral cortex and are to a greater extent involved in sensory processing, and the corticopontine fibers, which connect the cortex to the pons and are involved in motor planning. Damage or disruption of projection fibers can lead to various neurological disorders such as paralysis, spasticity, or sensory deficits, depending on the location and extent of the damage. There are three types. Association fibers interconnect cortical sites lying within the hemisphere. They are short or long fibers. Two commissioner fibers connecting functionally related gyri on both hemispheres. And projection fibers connecting the cortex with the lower centers in thalamus, brainstem, or spinal cord. They are ascending or descending. The term commissure refers to the band of nerve fibers that connect corresponding homologous regions between the two hemispheres. There are several commissures in the brain, including the corpus callosum, the anterior commissure, the posterior commissure, and hippocampal commissure. Commissure of the fornix. The corpus callosum is the largest and the most well-known commissure, consisting of about 200 to 250 million nerve fibers that connect the two hemispheres of the brain. It plays a crucial role in integrating sensory, motor, and cognitive information between the two hemispheres and is involved in many aspects of brain function, including language, memory, perception, and emotion. So the anterior commissure is a small commissure located in the front of the brain, which connects the two temporal lobes. It is involved in language processing, olfaction, and other sensory and motor functions. The posterior commissure is a small commissure located at the back of the brain, which connects the two visual centers. It is involved in visual processing, particularly in the perception of light and dark. The commissure of the brain play a crucial role in allowing the two hemispheres of the brain to work together and integrate information from different parts of the body and environment. An anterior commissure bundle of fibers runs transversely in front of the anterior columns of fornix. They connect the inferior and middle temporal gyri and the olfactory regions of the two hemispheres. The posterior commissure, rounded band of white fibers crossing the midline on the dorsal aspect of the upper end of the aqueduct, located between superior colliculus and pineal body. Then hippocampal commissure, bundle of fibers run transversely between the crura of the fornix. They connect the two hippocampal campi with each other. However, hippocampo-mammillary fibers do not cross. Corpus callosum. We are going to learn about corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is the largest white matter fiber bundle in the brain, with more than 300 million axons connecting the corresponding areas of two hemispheres. It is the largest commissioner in the brain. It plays a crucial role in integrating information about two hemispheres. It is involved in many aspects of brain function, including perception, motor control, memory, attention, and language. The study of the corpus callosum has provided important insights into the structure and function of the brain and has helped to advance our understanding of brain development, cognition, and behavior. So, damage or abnormalities in the corpus callosum can lead to various neurological disorders such as dyslexia, graphia, and dyscalculia, as well as conditions such as epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, lymphoma, and intrahemispheric spread of tumor, glioblastoma, multiforme. Researchers have also suggested that abnormalities in the corpus callosum may be associated with certain psychiatric disorders, including schizophrenia, depression, and bipolar disorder. The fibers of the anterior body are transversely oriented. Fibers originating from the genu and splenium tend to arch more anteriorly and posteriorly, forming the forceps minor and forceps major, respectively. Projections from the splenium, which pass inferiorly along the lateral margin of the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle to the temporal lobe, are called the tapetum and are easily identifiable at mid sagittal plane by their right and left orientation. The main function of the corpus callosum is interhemispheric sensory motor and auditory connectivity. Embryologically, the corpus callosum appears at 15 weeks and extends in both anterior and posterior directions during the following weeks before undergoing more anterior development at 19 weeks. And fornix. The fornix is a bundle of nerve fibers in the brain that plays a crucial role in memory and spatial navigation. It is located in the limbic system, which is involved in emotions, motivation, and memory formation. The fornix consists of two main components, the columns of the fornix and the body of the fornix. The columns of the fornix originate in the hippocampus, a region of the brain that is essential for the formation and retrieval of memories. The columns will merge together to form the body of the fornix, which passes through the thalamus and ends in mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus. The fornix include both afferent and efferent pathways between the hippocampus, the septal area, and hypothalamus and mammillary body. It has a C-shaped trajectory between the column body and crus. The fornix branches into two columns near the anterior commissure and project into the dorsal regions of hippocampi. Then, the fornix is involved in a number of important brain functions, including spatial memory and navigation, as well as long-term memory consolidation. It is also involved in regulating emotions and motivation, and abnormalities in the fornix have been associated with various psychiatric and neurological disorders, including Alzheimer's disease, depression, and schizophrenia. Imaging studies of fornix have provided important insights into its structure and function, and we have helped to improve our understanding of brain connectivity and how it is involved in cognitive and emotional process. Basal nuclei, organization, and function. The basal nuclei, also called the basal ganglia, are a group of nuclei located deep within the cerebral hemisphere of the brain. They are located in a variety of functions, including movement control, cognition, and emotional regulation. The basal nuclei are organized into three main structures: the caudate nucleus, the putamen, and the globus pallidus. The caudate nucleus and putamen are often referred to together as striatum. The globus pallidus is further divided into two parts, the external segment and the internal segment. The basal nuclei function as a complex system that receives input from the cortex, thalamus, and other brain regions, and then sends output to the thalamus and various cortical areas. The system plays a critical role in motor control, with the basal nuclei modulating the activity of the motor cortex to help initiate and control movements. In addition to motor control, the basal nuclei are also involved in cognitive functions such as decision making, reward processing, and working memory. The basal nuclei are also involved in emotional regulation and play a role in modulating the expression of emotions. So, disorders affecting the basal nuclei can result in various neurological and psychiatric conditions. For example, damage to the basal nuclei can result in movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease, while dysfunction in the basal nuclei has also been implicated in disorders such as Huntington's disease, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Tourette syndrome. Functionally, The putamen is more closely aligned to chordate nucleus and together constitute the neostrium or striatum. The globus pallidus is the oldest part of corpus callosum and is called pleostriatum or pallidum. Cortical white matter is a layer of myelinated nerve fiber seen in the brain, and they classified into three types: projection, association, and commissural fibers. So commissural fibers are several types that also include corpus callosum and fornix. Basal nuclei organization is a group of nuclei located within the brain. All these fibers control cognitive, emotional, structural, functional, and they maintain body character.